Okay, so today we're going to be talking about personal protective equipment, and this does have a voiceover on it, so each slide does have that, and you should be able to just click through that so that it's easier for you to use. But today we're going to be talking about personal protective equipment, also known as PPE. Now, the PPE is found in subpart I, but you're typically going to find, if somebody asks you about this, obviously you're going to look it up on the internet, but you can look in 1910, 132 through 138. And as you can see here, the general requirements are listed under here: eye, face, respiratory, head, foot, and hand. And an anomaly, which is here, is the electrical protective devices, but that is falling under personal protective equipment, which is kind of unique. There are also appendixes, which we discussed when we met the first time. And so that kind of shows you where the subpart I is and exactly what that means. And this is just specifically for general industry. Construction has its own PPE regulation. Now, when we start looking at OSHA's abatement or their hazard control hierarchy, obviously it's going to be engineering controls, administrative controls, and then PPE is going to be the last one. So let's go over all three of these in just general so that you can see these again. Now, engineering controls, and this is OSHA's wording, if you can physically change the machine or work environment to prevent an employee exposure to the potential hazard, then you've eliminated the hazard with an engineering control. So specifically what it's saying is that the engineering control engineers whatever hazard is out. The employee doesn't come in contact with it, and so that's why engineering controls are always going to be your best bet with regard to any type of hazard control. Now, some initial design specifications can be put in there. It's easier to actually do something when you're designing a machine or something that has to do with employees versus having to go back and retrofit it. Cost-wise, it's going to be a lot less. Then you're not going to have the employees complain, obviously, because you've changed something on the machine and it's harder to work with, and why can't we just have it the way we wanted to? But those are some things that you definitely do need to consider as a safety manager or someone who has safety responsibilities. Now, some examples of this is going to be ventilation, substitution, enclosure, isolation, and just totally changing the process of the way that the people do things. Now, the next one's going to be administrative controls, and this is going to be after you've tried engineering controls and you've documented that you cannot do any more, then you can go ahead and do administrative controls. Now, your engineering controls cost can be an issue, and you can put it in the budget or you can request it and say, at this time we can't afford that, but you do need to document that at least that you've done something or you've tried something engineering controls. Not always is engineering controls going to be really expensive, but sometimes it is. So you go to administrative controls. Now, this is pretty much going to be work practices. This is going to be your SOPs or your job procedures, those types of things. The item that nobody seems to even look at a lot of times. They're going to do it the fastest way or the way that they were taught by someone else. And so this one isn't always the best way to keep employees safe as much as engineering controls, because the hazard is still there. So when you look at OSHA's wording, if you can remove your employees from exposure to their potential hazard by changing the way they do their jobs, okay, then it's going to be a work practice control. So this can be like job rotation of workers. It can be, breaks. It can be any type of wet methods that you use with regard to welding or something like that. Personal hygiene controls. If the person is having to deal with lead, they have to go in and take a shower before they actually leave. Wash their hands. Housekeeping, keeping the area clean. Or it could be maintenance. This is our preventative maintenance program. This is how we're going to help with regard to this. Now, the last in OSHA's hazard control is going to be your PPE, and obviously that's what we're talking about today. This is the final defense according to OSHA, and so you have to make sure that you've documented why you can't use engineering controls. Then you have to document why you can't use administrative controls. Then you can move on to PPE. Now, PPE is going to be the least effective, mainly because none of us seem to wear our PPE the way that we're supposed to. And it's all the way across the board. I mean, even if you think about back when you were a child, you need to make sure that you wore a bike helmet. Well, they were sweaty, they were hot, they looked dorky, all of those types of things, and that you made sure that you didn't wear it. Look at seatbelts. Seatbelts is going to be some type of PPE in a sense with regard to a car, and just giving examples about how people don't wear those when they're supposed to. And you see time in and time out the person wasn't wearing a seatbelt. When it's there, it's really easy to put on, it's not really uncomfortable, but they just don't wear it. You get the same arguments when it comes to PPE in a workplace. When you're talking about faces, obviously, your eyes, your head, your feet, your hands, arms, body, hearing, all these are pretty much going to be somewhat uncomfortable, but it is important that the employee go ahead and wear these. So the requirements of PPE, the employer is the one who actually has to provide this, and they have to make sure that it is used and being used properly as well, and that it's being maintained. Now, with a pair of earplugs, there's not going to be a lot of maintenance with that in a sense, but like for respiratory protection, there is going to be some type of maintenance that's involving that. So what employers have to do is they have to actually select the PPE. They have to make sure that the PPE is proper for whatever the hazard is going to be. Now this can be done by a job hazard analysis, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. The other thing that the employee has to do is train the employee. Now you think, and this happens a lot of times, here's your hard hat, here's your earplugs, put them on, let's get to work. And that's what a lot of people tend to hear. And that's not always the case. People sometimes don't know how to wear earplugs, and so you do have to train with regard to those. Even hard hats or eyewear, you see people wearing those in a wrong way, but you still do have to train to it and make sure that the employee understands this. Once again, every time you train an employee, make sure that you document. Now the next thing you have to train to is proper fit. Different people, and just using hearing protection because it's here, different people have different sizes of canals in their ear, and one that may work for one employee might not work for another employee, which might not work for another employee. And so you do have to make sure that you offer at least 2 or 3 different types so that the person could actually get something that fits them and is going to be useful. You also have to do all of this through written certification. Once again, lots of paperwork. And then you have to make sure that you have some type of procedure for the employee to get something replaced if something happens. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I had a person who actually wanted to wear a pair of Oakley eyewear. And we said, okay, well, yeah, as long as it's the same eyewear that we've got, you can go ahead and wear it. That's not a problem. Let me just get that certified for you. We'll write it down, stick it in your personnel file in case there's any issues with that. Well, one day I guess he dropped his Oakley eyewear. He worked in the warehouse. For some strange reason, it fell right up underneath a forklift, crushed them totally, and he wanted us to replace those. Well, there wasn't anything that really damaged it that was caused by work procedures or something that he was doing. I'm not sure exactly what he was doing, I can't recall, but nothing like that would have been specific to that, and so he had to actually replace those himself. So that is something that you need to make sure that if a person is going to purchase something on their own, that it's the exact same type or close to the same thing, if it's Z87 or something like that, and that it would fit them properly. I document that obviously, and then make sure that they understand on that document that the replacement is going to be theirs unless it's something work related. Okay, so circumstances when you got to retrain, obviously, if there's any type of changes in the workplace, let's say that you have changed the procedure and they have to wear certain PPE. If an employee doesn't wear it, or if they don't understand why they have to wear that, that's another area where you have to retrain. And then the employee actually should retain that information. Now we know, all of us do, that employees a lot of times don't follow procedures, and they're not going to follow procedures if they didn't follow the administrative procedures. The PPE is going to be one more procedure that they're going to have to follow, and so we need to make sure that we are covering ourselves as an employer so that we're not getting OSHA breathing down our neck, but then we also have to make sure that the employees understand what we're talking about and why they're wearing this. And that's probably the easiest way to retrain, is just to actually have a conversation with the employer, or excuse me, the employee. And then obviously, at some point in time, you may have to have some type of punishment. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit too. Okay, eye and face protection. Most people know what this is. This can be, you can see his eye prescription eyewear that's underneath this. And a lot of times employers don't want to pay for prescription lenses with regard to eye and face protection. But that is something that your company can decide. If you do have a lot of people who wear prescription eyewear, you can offer some simple plan for them and maybe a price discount if they get their safety eyewear in prescription, or you can offer them goggles, whichever is the decision by management. Now, all eyewear does need to have some type of side protection. And even though you've seen a lot of those little rubber side protections that you can just kind of slip on your glasses, those have to be permanently affixed. They can't be something that's slid off and slid on. And so you need to make sure of that. With any type of markings, it's going to have a Z87.1 marking on there, and you do need to make sure that that's on the eyewear. A lot of times the purchasing director will get a good deal on some safety eyewear, and it's not going to be exactly what you want. So you do make sure that it has the proper markings on there and that it's going to be equivalent for what you're doing. Filter lenses, there's tons and tons of different eye and face protection out there. One of the things that I would suggest as a former safety manager is to have someone come out who is an expert in that, and that's typically going to be someone from a company that will come out and do an assessment for you and say, okay, this is what your hazards are. This is what we're suggesting that you use for PPE. Now, you don't have to obviously take them up on everything, because they're going to be out there for sales as well, but you do need to make sure that you're looking at it and saying, yes, this is what we need, or this is what we don't need. And they'll give you different price ranges on that. So if you're going to be working with something like chemicals, if you're going to be working with something like welding, the welding masks are awesome now. They are totally different than they used to be. And that's something that if we were together face to face, I would obviously show you, but I can't do that since we're not. Now, face shields, when you look at it, you do want to make sure that the employees understand that it doesn't protect them from impact hazards. So if something comes up and hits them, it's not going to specifically help them. Especially, it's essentially, it's going to be like some type of a face shield. It's just something to shield your face from some type of chemical or something like that splashing upon you. Now, when we talked about a little bit earlier the appendixes and things like that, this is the table that's in the 29 CFR, and this is actually 1926 that you can look at. But you do have to a lot of times combine different things, where people were wearing goggles and then they're wearing the safety glasses up underneath them. And there's just a very different types of glasses, prescription glasses, goggles, and welding shields here. Now, face shields, like I said, this is one that actually just will do more of a splash. Same thing with this one. They do have some now, and we're in the process of ordering those. Obviously, we can't do those or show you this because it's not face to face, but they do have like a curvature up underneath it, and those are a lot better, so that it's also protecting somewhat of your under your chin area and that type of area. Your welding helmets, these are really old welding helmets probably, but now they actually have, if you turn them on the inside and look at them, they have where if you're doing different levels of welding, you can actually change those, and it's just a little digital panel that's in there. They can change it to lighter or darker depending on what you're needing. So a lot of people actually like those. They do have face shields that can connect directly to hard hats, which is really nice nowadays. But one of the things you do need to make sure that employees understand, especially if you're just using the simple face shield, is that they have to wear the safety eyewear or the goggles up underneath that as well. Now, this is just an example, and this is in 1926 that I pulled out. It's an example of a selection guide. Okay, so the operation, let's say, is going to be electric arc welding. And so what we do is we just follow it across and look at the hazards. With that, obviously, it's going to be very intense rays. You're going to have sparks that are going to be flying, and there's going to be molten metal that's in there. And so it goes over in here, and it says choose 9 and 11, and that was on the last page. 11 in combination with 4, 5, and 6 in tinted lenses is advisable. So with that picture, which was actually pulled right out of OSHA, it just shows you, exactly what you need to get. As I said, you can actually have someone come in and do this for you, so you don't have to look at this yourself, but it is something that is helpful if you need to look at a table. Now, head protection, when you look at that, obviously we know hard hats and what hard hats are. And there's two different kinds of hard hats, actually three different kinds if you want to look at it that way. A hard hat, there's, just a regular hard hat, which is just going to help you if you bump your head. And there is something called a bump cap, which can be put up underneath your baseball cap if you want to do that, or you can just be worn alone. And the only thing that the bump cap is used for is going to be pretty much if you bump your head on something. So you have to lean under something, walk under something. Quite often that's what it's going to do. But the general hard hat is going to be like that as well. Now there is an electrical hard hat, which is a little bit different, and a lot of times they'll have a different rating on that. And you can definitely see these when you go into purchase, and it'll say electrical rating is going to be this, and it's a Class E hard hat. But you can see here that the suspensions are up underneath here, and those do need to be replaced after a specific amount of time. You've got some welds here. Sometimes they are replaceable. Sometimes you have to buy a new hard hat. Sometimes it's just cheaper to go buy a new hard hat altogether. But hard hats have really come a long way than they used to. So here you have your Class G that we were talking about, and that's just going to be your general, and then your Class E is going to be for your electrical work. Your Type 1 and Type 2 Class C pretty much is just your bump cap. It's just going to be if you hit your head or something like that. But most times you'll see companies go ahead and buy a Class E or a Class G, especially in construction of new homes or any type of other residential or commercial. And when you look at Class C, obviously it's just designed for comfort, but it does have real limited protection. It's just going to be against bumps, and so it's not that big of a deal. But this is kind of what happens is it just kind of crunches up, and it's not too helpful. I'd hate to see the guy's head that was actually in that. Okay, so let's go on to foot protection. There's a lot of different types of foot protection. And most people, most common, are going to be either slip-resistant shoes, which work sometimes, and then we have our steel-toed boots. But there are some other things that we'll look at also. So when there's any type of danger of foot injuries, this is something that you're going to probably want to wear. So your foot and leg protection choices when you look at them is metatarsal guards, and this is actually going to be an example of your metatarsal guard. And then you have some toe guards, which were just on that slide, and it just looks like little toe guard essentially. Then you'll have some shin guards, maybe some knee guards, safety shoes. You could even consider any type of rain boot. If you had to wear that in a specific area, that may be one. Slip resistant shoes, obviously, or it could be any in a clean room. You might have to wear some dust booties on there too. Your hand protection. This is where you get into real specifics, and there is tons and tons and tons of these. There's a charting out there that goes through and says this is what you need. As I mentioned earlier, it's probably best for you to have someone come out and actually look at this and see, this is what you are needing for this task, because it could be that you have 3 or 4 different chemicals that you're working with in one area, and you want to make sure that you're using it so that the employee's not having any type of absorption issues with any type of small cuts or anything in their hands. So you do have to look at this. This is obviously going to be some type of skin hazard. And you do have to look at, what is the task that the person is doing, what are the conditions, how long are they going to be using this chemical, because that does make a difference. And then what are some of those potential hazards that you have to look at. Obviously, if you're working with glass, you may wear some type of leather. It just kind of depends on what that is. Meat cutting, have some Kevlar gloves. Sometimes you need some grip protection, and so they do have different types of grip protections on there. And you can have a Kevlar glove that has grip protection. So they've really combined these. This has come a long, long way. These are a lot more comfortable than they used to be. And then you've got your general latex or any type of polypropylene gloves that you can find out there too. So your hand and arm protection, and this is when you're like looking at the types of the gloves. They can be made out of a lot of different materials, any type of metal mesh, leather, canvas, Kevlar, fabric. They can be coated. They can be chemical or liquid resistant, insulated rubber gloves, any type of asbestos gloves for heat, anything like that. And then there's also these things called Kevlar sleeves, and these are kind of nice, especially if you have something that the employee is going to be handling that's hot. And typically your glove is going to end up just right here at your wrist, and so this would protect the employee's arm. This one goes all the way up over the fingers, and this one obviously doesn't go over the thumb. So there's a lot of different kinds of hand and arm protection that's out there. Once again, you need to really look at the hazard analysis and see what is actually needed. This is a charting, and you can see how it gets to very, very specific. And so I think this is, I'm not sure which company this is from, but if you look at your barrier protection, your allergen content, strength, durability, elasticity, puncture resistant, fit, and comfort. And so what they've done is they said, okay, with these latex, and just to kind of use this as an example, they're excellent when it comes to barrier protection. Well, yeah, for certain things. Then you look at the allergen content. Well, a lot of people are allergic to latex, and so what a lot of people do is they'll come over here and use the nitrile gloves. But it just kind of depends. And then the strength and durability, obviously, is fairly good on this. Obviously, you stick them on there. Elasticity is wonderful on these. Puncture resistant. It's resistant to punctures, but can obviously, if you poke it with something, it's going to tear fairly easily. And there's different grades of these as well, because you can get some really, really cheap latex gloves that look like little plastic bags on your hands, or you can get some that are a lot better and a lot more comfortable. Now, your body protection, when you look at this, there's a lot of different things with regard to this too. So if you look at splashes of any type of hot liquids or metals, if you think of something maybe coming back at you, and so you may need to have some type of leather apron on. You're going to be looking at cuts, any type of chemicals, or any type of infectious materials, radiation. And there's the vests that are out there. You've got some coats that are very durable, and then you also have pants, but it can be a lot of different things. Okay, so your materials for your protective clothing can go anywhere from like a paper-like fabric, any type of Tyvek material, something like that, all the way up to something that's rubberized or neoprene or any type of plastics. And all of these have their different issues and the reasons why those are used. Your apron is probably going to mean, you see he has the sleeves on here too. Maybe he's welding, maybe he's doing something with some type of heavy material and hot metal or something like that. Also, too, you would need to think when you look at protective clothing, not just think of does it protect them with regard to something with a machine or some sparks or something like that, but heat and cold are in this as well. And so maybe they do need to have some type of duck coat or something like that. So your PPE program that you have to do on this is going to be pretty extensive, as you can see, because you do have to go in and make sure that you're looking at the hazards and selecting whatever PPE is going to be needed for each of those hazards. Now, one job could have several, and so one job, meaning a person's working 8 hours in this area, they could be doing a lot of different things with that and come in contact with chemicals. Maybe they come in contact with some type of bright lights. Maybe they have to wear a hard hat because of the area that they're working in. They may have to wear slip resistant shoes or some type of boot that has some type of steel toed in that. All of these issues do have to be looked at. It's just not one part of it. So first you have to assess the workplace, obviously, and then go in, as we talked about previously, do your engineering controls and try to eliminate any type of hazards with that, as well as your administrative or work practice controls. Then at that point, then you can go ahead and use your PPE and look at it. You do need to talk to your employees and tell them why the PPE is necessary and when exactly it's going to be worn. And so some signage and training is going to be having to be done on that. You do have to make sure that you talk to the employees about how to care for it, um, you know, whatever that you've chosen, and how to also know that if it's deteriorated too much or if it's failed. And then you do need to make sure that you require your employees to wear these PPE in the workplace. And so there you may have some type of program if a person's caught, this is what happens the first offense, second offense, third offense, that type of thing in your PPE program. This is just a checklist to kind of help you understand when establishing the PPE program. One of the things with all of the programs is to make sure that you are following through and evaluating it. Does it work? Does it not work? What happens? Because it is helpful for you as a safety manager or manager. This is a typical job hazard analysis, and what you're doing is you're actually looking at the hazard. So a hazard is any laboratory or general use of chemicals, and that's what the hazard is. And so what they've said is, okay, you have got to have safety eyewear on. And these are going to be safety glasses or goggles probably. And if you're in the lab, this is going to be required. With regard to your face, it's not going to be. And this may be just someone kind of walking through or wearing or using just general chemicals. Making sure that you have no open-toe shoes or shorts, having long pants, that type of thing, and then having an overgarment. And then going through and actually looking, let's say down here, in sharp objects and glass insertion of tubes into stoppers. You have to wear your safety glasses again. And then you also have to wear a heavy cloth barrier or leather gloves. And then it gets down into extreme temperatures. And so, as I said, with one job, you can have several different types of PPE that's required depending on what task the employee is doing at the time. So once you've actually looked at, a PPE program, and this just kind of goes through of how to train the employees. You do have to tell them this is the PPE that you have to wear. This is why the PPE, why you're having to wear the PPE. This is when you have to wear the PPE. How to inspect it, how to put it on, how to take it off, which is on and off, and then how to make sure that they understand the limitations for the PPE, because a lot of people don't. They just think if they have these earplugs, I can just go anywhere, and that may not be true. Or if I have these gloves on, I can work with any chemical, and once again, that's not normally true either. And then they also need to know how to properly care for it and store for the PPE. So there's tons of different resources out there. And as I said, one of the other resources that you can use is probably your person who sells the PPE to you. They can be a huge resource because they'll come out and do that for you. It may take a little while, especially if you're starting from scratch, but they can look at that and say, okay, this is what we want, where we're seeing. They can also come out and just review your job hazard analysis that you've already done in certain areas and say, yes, this is right, or no, this is right. And so they really know a lot of different information about that.